Okay, here we are on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I've got a very musical mockingbird outside. I think he's trying to find a mate to build a nest with, so he's quite musical, and actually woke me up this morning. Anyway, so if you hear that, that's what's going on. Okay, well, last night I read your posts on Harriet Jacobs and I offered comments. Yeah, honestly, I think folks did a better job with the Jacobs discussion than the Douglas discussion. So I think folks get it. So let me put Jacobs in a larger context, contextualize her in some cultural history we've already been discussing, and I'll tie all that to the book itself. Well, you remember in my last lecture on Douglas getting into this whole discussion about how Douglas was trying to reach out to his readers, specifically by trying to appeal to their sense of themselves as Americans and as Christians, and saying that slavery violates just the fundamentals of both, our values as Americans and our values as Christians. Jacobs is doing something similar, and I already touched on that in the last lecture, and I'll say a little bit more about this, that she's trying to say that slavery violates our fundamental conceptions of womanhood. And this is how she's going to reach out to her readers. And yes, and so just a couple basics here. We do know that Jacobs in her narrative, and what we get in this book, these are just a handful of chapters out of this larger narrative called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And we know from the book that she does have women readers in mind. She'll reach right out sometimes and say, you know, as women, you never knew what it was to have a master, you know, sexually harass you, you know, that kind of thing. So we know she has primarily a female readership in mind. So these are the assumptions that she's making about her women readers. First of all, that they're Northern, first of all, and secondly, that they're white. And then she goes on to say that just systematically just goes through and wants to say how slavery, you just go down the list of what a woman is supposed to be, and slavery just destroys every single one of them. And yeah, if I had a blackboard, I don't have a blackboard here at home, just my wall with pictures and stuff. Actually, that mirror over there, that was my grandmother's. And that watercolor up there, that was my grandfather's. He was in World War II and helped rebuild the country after the war, World War II. You know, the infrastructure was just destroyed. And he was a civil engineer, and he worked to rebuild the country. So that's actually a watercolor of one of the construction sites that he was in charge of, basically. Anyway, that's way more than you wanted to know. Okay, well, if we were in class, this would be a blackboard, and I'd write some stuff up there. But of course, I can't do that. And yeah. Okay, I was trying to find a piece of paper here. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, so if I had a blackboard, I'd write these things up on the blackboard. And you remember this during the course of the semester, that these are the fundamental virtues of womanhood. We learned this from Susanna Rouse and all the way up through Fanny Fern. Women are to be submissive to their husbands, submissive to their fathers, right? Women are to be pure. Remember that was Charlotte's problem. She'd lost her purity because she was seduced. So women are to maintain their purity, and women are to be domestic. That women are to stay in the home, raise good, strong children so they can be good Americans. Women aren't supposed to leave the home, right? Okay, all those kinds of things. So, you know, we've been talking this semester, of course, how these virtues have tended to be very limiting for women, and for all sorts of obvious reasons, I think. But, you know, the vast majority of women at this time period still looked at these virtues as being codes of honor and sources of protection for them. So lots of women really valued these virtues. And let me just explain from a woman's point of view how these virtues would have been understood as being a source of protection and safety and comfort and everything else. First of all, submissiveness. Say, you know, why am I going to be submissive to anyone, right? But the way the thinking worked was that, yes, I'm submissive to my husband, but my husband loves me. He has only my best interests at heart, so he will nurture and protect me. Okay? So, yeah, and maybe that works if you have a good husband, but if you have kind of a jerk, then he's going to be oppressive and awful and abusive and everything else, right? Okay. The next is purity. Yes, we consider man, you know, it's really restrictive. Women can explore their sexuality. Their own sexuality is not their own business. You know, all that sort of stuff. To one degree or another, that might be our point of view today. But, you know, 150 years ago, the thinking really among women was, yes, I'm to maintain my purity, but my purity is really understood to be the safety of my own body, that I'm not going to have to deal with unwanted sexual advances and this kind of thing. So a woman's purity was to be honored and respected by men around her, so they're not going to try to seduce her or make unwanted advances to her, make dishonorable advances, that they're only after one thing as opposed to being after an honorable marriage, right? So purity from that point of view can be understood as being a source of protection for women. Okay, and then finally, domesticity. You know, we saw in Fanny Fern that domesticity, holy cow, you know, you feel trapped. And, you know, in the midst of our pandemic here, we're all getting to know our homes maybe a little more than we ever really wanted to. We want to be out in the world the way Fanny Fern did, right? But again, from point of view of many women, 150 years ago, domesticity, again, would have been at least believed to have been a source of protection for them. Yes, there's fears in the home. The home sums up the sum total of their lives. You know, they're to be good homemakers, good mothers, good cooks, you know, etc. But again, the way this can turn into a positive for a woman 150 years ago is that, you know, she gets to have a man in her life that's going to provide her with a nice, safe, beautiful, comfortable home. So she's going to get that, and that's a good thing. So you see how those things from a different point of view could be understood to be a net positive for women. Okay. All right. I'm not saying that I agree with that or something like that, or you should or shouldn't, or, you know, nothing like that. I'm simply trying to explain the historical mindset from 150 years ago. That's all. Okay. So these are some of the assumptions that Harriet Jacobs is making about her female audience. That this is what they want, this is what they believe, and this is what they are striving to maintain. Okay? All right. So, what's the upshot here? And I'll just say it right now. So if you're taking notes, this would be a really good thing to write down. Okay? The sum total of all this is, all right, we have a woman is to be submissive, pure, and domestic. Okay? Fair enough, right? Jacob's argument is, and she does this systematically and in a devastating fashion, she says slavery, the institution of slavery, destroys each and every one of these for women. Primarily slave women, but even white women too. Slavery destroys this ideal for womanhood. And so Jacobs is saying, again, talking primarily to women, she says, if you care about these things, which is a sum total of your womanhood, if you care about these things, then you will care about slavery and what slavery is doing to your most cherished principles and ideals. And if you care, then you're going to get off your butt and go and do something. You might say, well, geez, this is 1860, Richardson. I mean, you know, what could women do in 1860? They were stuck in the home. They couldn't vote. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Remember, women were supposed to be pious. They're supposed to be spiritual, religious women. So women had a lot of access to the church and church activities. And so this is actually a place where women could and did go and get involved to do something outside of the home for the good of people outside of their home. It was through the church. And some of the strongest abolitionist institutions in these years were churches, okay? Were churches. So women could be involved in abolitionist work at church. The other thing that they could do is that they were understood to have influence over their husbands. Even though women couldn't vote, they were encouraged to try to work to persuade their husbands. Yes, they had to be submissive, but through gentle persuasion, maybe she could sit down with her husband after dinner and say, honey, I was reading in the newspaper, and did you hear about this or that or the other happening with slavery? You know, my goodness, there must be something we can do, okay? And if she has a decent husband, you know, the way Fanny Fern had a decent husband, the way Mrs. Richmond had a decent husband in Charlotte Temple, who'll listen. Can you believe that? That husbands sometimes listen to their wives? Sometimes it happens, right? And vice versa. So that's the assumption also that Jacobs is making, that even in their very limited sphere, women are going to have some influence through their husbands, through their churches primarily. Okay, makes sense. All right, so, okay. Okay, all right. So another way of talking about this upshot here then, that slavery is an assault on true womanhood. Another way of talking about this, you know, we know from Harriet Jacobs' point of view, she starts off the story, you know, she has a good childhood, as a lot of you mentioned, didn't even know she was a slave, she was nurtured, she was cared for. You know, we can assume she was taught well, all these kinds of things. You know, she started to have the dreams that any young woman in these years would have, which is, you know, I'm waiting for my Prince Charming to come. I can't wait to get married and have a home of my own and all these kinds of things. And that's exactly what she does. So she's doing everything that the true woman is supposed to do, right? She maintains her purity. She respects and honors her family. She's simply waiting for that Prince Charming to come along, which of course she does. And he comes along. Okay, and we know the story. What ends up happening is that slavery at every turn is thwarting her desire to simply get on with her life as a woman. She can't marry a good man. She can't have a home of her own. Um, and therefore, she doesn't have a decent husband to really be submissive to. Her life, her life uniquely as a woman is destroyed. And it's not because of anything that she did, all right? She's not Charlotte Temple even, although she was a pretty good woman, but she was seducible, she was naive. Even that's not Charlotte. She was even a better young woman than Charlotte was. The only thing that wrecked her desire to be a good woman is slavery. Slavery destroyed, okay, let me get a pen. Again, I'd have this up on the board. Slavery destroyed each and every one of these ideals in turn. Submissiveness, purity, domesticity, destroyed them. Okay, so let's look at how she makes that point. Okay, first of all, look over on page 915. 915. Okay, so she has herself a nice man. This nice man respects and honors her and everything, and wants to be a good husband for her and wants her to be his loyal wife, right? So, Jacobs does what she's supposed to do, goes to her slave master and says, "Hi, I'd like to marry this man." And this is what happens. Top of 915. "How dare you tell me so?" he exclaimed in great wrath. Really? All she's doing is being a good young woman, and she gets screamed at? After a slight pause, he added, I suppose you thought more of yourself than felt above the insults of such puppies." And you wouldn't know this, but puppy, back in these years, those are fighting words. Now we think puppy and we think how cute, right? But no, puppy, those are fighting words. That's a terrible thing for a man to tell another man. I replied, "If he is a puppy, I am a puppy. For we are both of the Negro race. It is right and honorable for us to love each other. The man you call a puppy never insulted me, sir, and he would not love me if he did not believe me to be a virtuous woman. He sprang upon me like a tiger and gave me a stunning blow." So simply being a good woman and asserting the fact that she's a good woman, she gets screamed at and beat up. This is really designed to grab the hearts of Northern women and just say, good Lord, everything that I hold sacred and dear is being destroyed by this evil man, Dr. Flint, who's being enabled by this disgusting institution called slavery. Okay? This is the strategy that Jacobs is taking. This is the strategy that Jacobs is taking. Okay. So she's denied domesticity. She's denied marriage. Okay. What about purity? And this is probably the most obvious one, and nearly every one of you commented on this and commented on it very well. A woman's purity, again, purity was understood by women to be, all right, my body is being protected, okay? A slave woman, you really think her body is protected when held in bondage? Remember, she doesn't own herself, and that includes her body. And she has no way of saying no, okay? No. And just to put it in perspective this way, I mean, we know about the cultural moment we're in right now, the Me Too movement, you know, women who are just coming forward and saying, me too. You know, I'll never forget that day on Facebook when all my friends, you know, friends I'd known for years, teachers, professors, you know, these women just one after another, me too, me too, me too, me too on Facebook. I'm not naive. I mean, I knew this kind of thing happened, but even I was shocked the extent to which women had their own stories. And yeah, I mean, let's just set the record straight. Men too are subject to sexual abuse, but the statistics are that many times more, a much greater percentage of women have unwanted sexual advances, much greater percentage of women than men. Okay, so just put that in perspective a second. Here you have free women, you know, 160 years after the end of slavery, and still talking about, to a much greater degree, they're being sexually assaulted than men. You know, what do you think things were like then for women who were stuck in slavery? Of course things were infinitely worse for them than even women today. Okay, so just think about that and put that in perspective. So yes, purity, for a slave woman to maintain purity or safety around her own body, lots of luck, folks. And this is exactly what Jacobs is talking about here. So I'll tell you what, let me just turn this to part 2. This lecture is already about 22 minutes. So let me stop here, and then next link will be part 2. Okay, stand by.